See,
Better.
we don't have any public in attendance. Are there anybody online? I don't see anybody.
Hey, I'm online. It's Jeff.
You're not the public, though.
Oh, I am tonight.
Okay, let's move on to the non-public person who's on, our zoning administrator.
I wasn't sure. I couldn't hear any of the first part of the meeting, so I wasn't sure you were getting me at all. Good evening, folks.
Yeah, you want to make sure buttons are on if they're not already.
Hear me and I can see you, and I guess I'm all good. I'm the only other. There's two other persons on. Who else is on? There's two persons on.
Yeah, it's just you, Jeff, and us in the room tonight.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, I have a somewhat unusual zoning administrator report. If you haven't already heard, the town of Brandon management has asked me to pick up from 12 to 14 hours to 24 hours a week. And they have the budget passed so they can afford additional zoning administrator hours. Glitch is I don't have hours to add to my already full schedule. And so I had made this clear when I was first appointed 6 years ago. I can't believe it. Time's gone by, but just about 6 years ago. And so, I had suggested that perhaps an administrative assistant part-time to the zoning administrator who could also then be the alternate zoning administrator in my absence and the future zoning administrator at some point. But the town is elected to open the position to other interested folks and not reappoint me unless I take on 24 hours. Well, I feel I have commitments to two other towns that I would not be showing good faith in, and so I've declined to take that option. I just wanted to make sure everyone here understood it wasn't my intention to leave the town of Brandon for zoning administrator, and if some other solution can be suggested, then maybe this isn't the end of the world. But you may also have me stick on board for a while training any candidate, or perhaps the board would ask the select board to allow me to participate as a paid consultant to the planning commission in the drafting of the Blue O. Seeing that I've worked with the Blue O for some time now. So that's my zoning administrator report tonight. Oh, the other thing is I'm missing a couple of weeks of regular hours because I'm focusing on doing a certain phase of my retirement home construction. I anticipate that hiatus will pass in a 3-week period. This week and the next 2 weeks, if all goes as scheduled, I will be back to the regular zoning hours pretty much. What I've been doing is picking up and working zoning hours on unconventional times like evenings and so on, just to keep the office afloat. But that's unsustainable, until things slow up a bit. So now I'm done. Thank you. Questions? I'm sorry I missed the walk Thursday, by the way. I had to go out of town to visit. Yeah.
All right, thank you for the report. I move the planning commission enter executive session for provision of 1 VSA 313A3 regarding the appointment of a public officer as the zoning administrator for the purpose of considering our nomination to the select board of a candidate for a zoning administrator. said session to include the town manager. So at this point, we vote on going into executive session.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Let them
Aye.
mute me out. Yes.
So we,
Wait.
I do as well.
Yes.
I'm not able to get in there right now, so probably what should happen is people who are not in the session.
so we can mute and we could, where's the mouse? Can we,
That was yes.
pause the recording?
Oh, you've got it. There. Okay. I'm gonna pause the recording and we'll mute. Okay, we are reconvening, Jeff.
You saw me waving.
Everybody hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Let's let Charlene get organized again.
Okay.
So the planning commission has come out of executive session, and we're now going to vote on the appointment of Larry Stevens as a zoning administrator. Any questions? Do I have a motion to nominate Larry for the position that the recommendation to the select board? We have a second. All in favor? Aye. The ayes have it.
Would you just note that Sarah has been out of the room?
So this is just a nomination to go to the select board.
Yes.
We have a question on the chat. What's the job post?
They can respond.
Basis.
Was the job posted? The job was posted internally, which is the town's policy when we have an open position. And when we have a qualified candidate internally who's interested, we don't post the job further.
The commissioners have voted to nominate Larry Stevens as the new zoning administrator, which is why Sarah was out of the room. So, all right, shall we move on to the,
I just want to make sure. Sure she was.
now she had a conflict.
What's the effective
So-
date of what's the effective date of the appointment is when?
I'm sorry, Jeff, I didn't hear that.
What's the effective date of the appointment? Know when the appointment is over.
So the effective date would be up to the select board, but it would be after the conclusion of your appointment.
Okay, I don't know what that date was, but okay. Yep.
Sorry, Jeff, your appointment concludes on July 14th.
Okay, let's back on the normal agenda. We have discussion of the walking tour that took place on Thursday night. We had some public turnout and the commissioners. Actually, Lisa is now official as a member of the Planning Commission as of July 1st. She was a guest the other
That was the public.
night. So what kind of feedback do you have on how it went? Logan, you want to weigh in?
Sure, I thought it was great. I think one thing that I felt was a takeaway was the importance of parking, talking about increasing density and making sure that there's adequate, there's provisions that ensure there's adequate parking for that density. That the increased amount of the changes in the bylaws that would allow for an increased amount of density, that if those developments come, ensuring that the Blue has adequate provisions to meet that increased demand for parking. I thought, that was a takeaway that I thought.
I thought it was very interesting. We did a short walk up Park Street.
Mm.
And then we took a short walk up Franklin Street. They're both in what's considered the residential district, and they're entirely different, size lots and setbacks and things like that, accessory dwelling units, parking and garages. So we don't really have a way to distinguish in the current Blue O, between a residential area with a lot more open space and other parts of the town that were built 100 years ago, where the houses are right up on the street and very close to each other. Yeah.
I actually thought it would be. I actually thought it would.
What?
That it would be very useful to have two residential zoning districts, one denser and older and the other one less dense. In respects. What the ramifications of that would be.
And we did walk up as far as the old high school, which in itself is a very unique situation. It's in the central business district. It really does not have adequate parking. But the Blue O itself says if there is public parking within a quarter mile, then you don't have to have off-street parking. So again, that's something I don't know what their future plans are. They came in and presented to the DRB and then pulled their application temporarily. So other comments?
I can't raise my hand on here for some reason. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I heard something about two residential zoning districts. Can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, two separate kinds of residential areas.
Lines that have larger lots. Setbacks. Park Street, for example.
And smaller ones. Lesser setbacks along Franklin Street.
Oops.
Along Street.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, we have two separate types of residential areas. We have the older, larger lots, bigger setbacks. And then we have the older sections or the smaller sections. I would divide it into landowners and workers kind of thing. The wealthier areas when they were first constructed, and the more workman-like structures that are smaller and closer to the streets, so shorter setbacks. And I don't think it makes sense to have them both subject to the same guidelines.
So they would be separated by size rather than location?
Yeah, they would be separated by the neighborhood. So if all of the houses along the residential houses along Franklin Street are similar in lot size and setback, and they're uniform, and they appear to be, designed that way kind of, then that would be one zoning designation. And maybe with a different height restriction as well. And then areas like Park Street and I'm not sure if Mount Pleasant, I don't know other areas. Would be subject to a different set of requirements that they can more easily meet.
So this is something we're considering. We haven't gotten very far on it yet. This
Okay.
came out of the walking tour. I think one of the motivations is that if a new house were to be built on Franklin Street, it would be on a non-conforming lot. And it would have to have different setbacks than the other houses on the street. So it would affect the character of the neighborhood because it wouldn't look like it fit in.
Okay,
So the planning commission is working through a lot of potential changes, all of which will be fully vetted with the folks in town. We plan a number of different public outreach sessions. The walking tour was one of them. And these planning commission monthly meetings on which we discuss any of these changes to the zoning are fully open to the public. And recordings are kept and minutes are posted to the town website. Did that
I had
answer
a-
your question?
it does. Do you have, so you don't know anything specifically, because I remember on the tour you guys mentioned maybe having a different district for Union Street. Do you have any thoughts on that going into this discussion?
I don't think we specifically talked about Union Street, but that could potentially be another one that would be in the version of the residential area that was more densely created at an earlier time. Or perhaps, further out on Union Street would be part of the other residential area. We haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay. I just have one more question as far as the walking tour that you had, because I was there.
Mhm.
You had talked about up to 5 units per acre, and there was one house specifically on Franklin Street that is being converted from 3 to 5. And I'm just curious, because I know part of the repeal for Act 250 was said to be for affordable housing. So is there anything as far as what you're doing now that is going to work in conjunction with affordable housing?
I can speak to that if you'd like. So the Act 250 law you're referring to just passed, and there was also a Home Act that's what the 5 dwelling units per acre standard came from. And the intent is in this update to align with these state requirements, both the new Act 250 law you're mentioning, as well as the Home Act that passed around this time last year, that also speaks to zoning. So for both of those laws, we're going to ensure alignment. I will add that affordable housing developments, which is a kind of very specifically defined term by the state of Vermont under 24 VSA. It's the whole law that governs municipal planning and regional planning. Under that law, affordable housing developments, as it's defined, there are some density exemptions that the state put into that law that will be aligned. So really, as a part of this update, we'll be aligning with all of these state requirements. And as we are going through this, I'm communicating that with the Planning Commission, as this is something that all towns in the Rutland region are going through, is aligning with the state requirements. So that's coming, and some of it's already reflected in some of the discussions we've had in past, but that's definitely part of it.
So the Franklin Street building that you were referring to was requested a permit from the zoning administrator. It did not fit into the current zoning regulations. So Jeff called the session of the Development Review Board, and they made a decision in that case. Well, that was not a
So
planning
that was,
commission thing.
an exemption
That was
for,
reviewed. It was
Right.
reviewed by the DRB.
Sure.
Jeff, you wanted to add something?
It was a variance. That was granted. That was the specific, application for the calendar review thing. Was for the board to grant a variance. And the board's decision was to grant a variance because it followed state law.
okay. So I was
Any
just
other questions?
curious with, trying to create density in downtown. I mean, and with the push for affordable housing, I mean, is there gonna be anything in the zoning or the plan that you guys are working on that is gonna say that these units need to be created for rental spaces for actual residents, or whether they could be created for Airbnbs and stuff like that?
Well, we haven't dealt with the Airbnb issue. No, we haven't gotten that far at this point. I don't know that it's an issue in this town, but it's something we should discuss at some point.
Sense to have set aside for lower income housing in any development. I've seen in other places 20% lower income. Or some number. So we could consider that.
So the town itself is not going to be at this particular event. But, you know, we certainly could encourage, if there were to be a multi-unit development, that a certain portion of it be set aside under what the state considers to be affordable. I know that up in Middlebury, for instance, they have 120 unit development going in there, and between the state and the lender, well, they have put in those kind of requirements. Any other questions? Any feedback on the walking tour?
Well,
Is it-
I'm not sure that it's specific, but it definitely was a question that came from me out of the walking tour, and actually some of the discussions from the select board was, the fee for some residents to contest, a building permit is $250, and that would be for each time. So I just want to bring that up as you're revising the town plan about considerations for, I don't know, some residents, if they have difficulty coming up with that kind of money to contest if one of their neighbors is doing something with all the changes going on that they would like to
So
And
I
I-
think the $250 fee is a fee to appeal a DRB decision.
Hmm.
And Jeff,
Could
you
I
can
weigh
correct me.
in on that? Okay, so the select board sets the fees. It's not up to the planning commission. Planning commission could make recommendations, however, on improving the fee schedule and perhaps clarifying it. There's some practice now that if the development review board hears an application for a conditional use, and that application also involves an Act 250 review, that there should be two separate hearings. And the through the town manager's office, when Atherton was around, the policy softened so that while there was two hearings on paper, there was only one $250 fee. But the fee schedule, which is as printed doesn't identify that. There was also a suggestion in practice about the recording fees. The clerks are entitled under the state statute to charge $15 per page of every page being recorded. DRB decisions are typically 2 or 3 pages long, and those are recorded, but there's only been in the past a one single $15 fee, regardless of the number of pages. When this came up about a year ago, the clerk said, we're agreeable to recording the entire DRB decisions, regardless of the number of pages, for a flat fee of $30. It's just that the fee schedule has not been updated. So there's some things in the fee schedule, like talking about fee schedule, just to summarize, the fee schedule as printed, which is approved by the select board, could use clarification. It doesn't, for example, require a fee for an above ground swimming pool. So people translate that in real life to mean it doesn't need a permit. No, the rules don't give a waiver because the fee is free. The rules say if you want an above ground swimming pool over 100 square feet, which is the exempted area, it should have a permit. And usually the pools have a deck, and there's a deck rule and a fence rule in the Blue Oak. So there's areas where the board should probably want to clarify things.
Thank you.
The town manager joined us on the walk. Does he have any feedback?
I want to thank you for organizing it, and I really do want to thank Jack for the thought that he put into planning it, so that at the various stopping points, there were interesting things to remark upon about Brandon. I appreciate all the work that the Planning Commission is doing. The town obviously wants to support your work, and I think that you're off to the best possible start with what you're doing and with what Logan and the RPC are doing to support you. So I agree with what Jeff just said. The fee schedule is something that has sort of lived on its own next to the Blue O, and it would be really great if we could make sure it aligns perfectly with the new version of the Blue O. I think that has come to the select board in the past as a standalone document that was, at the recommendation of the zoning administrator, which was always good stuff. But since you're doing the Blue O anyway, it would be great if we could make sure that the alignment is correct there.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next agenda item is to sort of start digging into the articles of the zoning ordinance. Logan has done a whole lot of work on our behalf.
Yeah, is there any particular article we want to start? Essentially anything that, in a public meeting, we have went over, made suggestions, came back to, and agreed upon on the changes that we've, agreed upon those. And so each article has little things that we could go back to. We could also focus on articles 2 and 3, which are kind of the, I guess you could say, like the meat of the Blue O. So that's the zoning district specific information. That's all the setbacks. That's all. And then article 2 is also the use categories. So how do we categorize? And so I don't know if that's a good place to start, or talking about, potential zoning district changes, or, continuing that discussion, or we could continue discussion on signs. I guess there's kind of, or we could go into a different topic, like subdivisions. I know it was something that you had mentioned at one point. So I had a lot. So I don't know if there was any preference the planning commission had focused in one article or another. Or yeah, I'm okay with any articles, 1 through 9, with the exception of the flood bylaws.
So I would say, as a part of our outreach to the public, I think we would like to have a session with the Chamber of Commerce to discuss businesses' input on the below.
Okay.
Sometimes we just tend to think in terms of residential. We really should also be focused on the commercial. And I think one large part of what they would be most interested in is signage.
Right.
I think we're confusing two
If
parts.
I- If I might add, I might
Right,
remind the planning commission that 2 years plus ago, there was a survey to the members of the chamber and there was some response. It was, I would say, minimal response, but if anybody wants a copy of that, I can produce it. Between now and-
If you could send it to the whole planning commission and me as well, that'd be wonderful, Jeff.
I'd say signage is probably the area of which the most. Really much summary, different sign types.
I've so I presented that to the planning commission last meeting, kind of a potential sign verbiage based off of looking at about 9 different municipalities across New England in a model bylaw from an industry group relating to signage, and kind of piece together based off of how it fit Brandon. That I'll note that they're in what I had sent to the planning commission. This version, I did make some adjustments, more from a administrative standpoint. And then Natalie had also sent me a working doc that had some comments on signage from some planning commission members. So I wanted to include that input as well as the input from our last discussion. And so the intent was really to keep most of the concepts with the exception of, input from everyone, whether it be on the Word documents or in public meeting, and also for clarification and administrative standpoint, so that the administrator isn't burdened, and also from a clarification standpoint, so that the applicant understands exactly what's required of them. So I just want to flag that as well, that there are some revisions to that language. And Natalie also had some verbiage she had sent me based off of some of her former planning work as a planning consultant across Vermont. She had sent me some language that she thought was good to include. So I also included that as well. That's what I had emailed everyone. And I'll double check, Neil, that I sent you the right email. So, and that's the full Luo that I had sent most recently. Yeah, that might have been last week, last Thursday, maybe last Wednesday. So yeah, it was fairly recently, and I apologize. I was trying to get as much to you all at once so that you had it, and I wasn't sending you 8 different versions. So
That's even answer.
yeah, so that includes all the work prior. So Natalie had a separate working doc. So I took all of that and combined it into this working doc, as well as the spatial analysis that I had handed out, as well as the signage. I actually put it after those revisions I just mentioned. I inserted it as a separate article as opposed to a accessory structure section as we had previously discussed, which is kind of the common placement of sign as its own article as opposed to just a section. Yeah. So that's what I tried to do as well, is the signs. And I saw it might have been I could be wrong, but I did see some mention of whether specific sign types should be required to get a permit, or that they can be exempt so long as they meet health and safety and public welfare related standards of ensuring a certain amount of sidewalk, and just basically notifying the town that they're planning on putting up an exempt sign so that the town is aware of it. So that if it's not exempt, the town could say, hey, that's not exempt, you need to get a permit.
As we talked about on the walking tour, the jump signs. They have applied properly for a number of the signs, for a number of the ones that were also added on later on, not included in the front. So things like the lighted, the direction of signs. Yeah. Those we need to cover in the next version of the rule. Understanding that the illuminated direction of signs are not within
Okay.
so the signs they have the PD, this direction. The song itself is okay, except for the PD.
So presently,
Question about the meaning for the back of the building when you drive up to make it different. Is that a sign? Is that a sign that should be exempt?
yeah.
So those are the kind of questions you really should. Help them.
So I'll answer all of those based off of the model language I had written. And this is all subject to change. And this is just so that you guys have a starting point to look at it and say yes or no. And, you know, this is an issue, this isn't. So for directional signage, provided that the sign is a certain size in terms of the area of the sign, it's called the base area of the sign. And then provided that the sign is of a certain height, it is exempt, and the sign may be illuminated provided that it meets the outdoor lighting standards that are currently in the blue. That's that answer. For electronic menu boards is the term that's defined. The language I had suggested was the electronic menu boards have to meet the outdoor lighting standards, and in order to meet the outdoor lighting standards, they need to either be user controlled operated. So this is based off of the industry of electronic menu board. They either have, or message board, either user controlled settings so that you know, turn on the lights at a certain time based off the sun, or dimming settings that automatically dim. And that's actually the more common, or the dimming settings that automatically dim based off of some sort of lighting component. However, it doesn't. So basically it's an automatic dimming feature, and it slowly dims in a manner that meets the illumination standard. And then there's also specific language that just speaks to that the signs can't like move, flash, or, you know, that sort of idea, that basically it has to be a static menu board, essentially.
So the Duncan folks have tried to use non-electronic directions.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's an instance. You want to make sure that safety is critical. Especially, you know, Right, yeah.
what, two things. One, your mic is cutting in and out. It's kind of garbly. I don't know if it's a battery thing or what. And two, the menu boards pretty commonly have pages. The menus change as you're sitting there.
Right.
Considering order. Now, whether you want to accept that I agree, it's a standard today in the menu board type of sign. So,
And I apologize if
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that doesn't mean you still can't regulate scrolling messages like a bill. I'll call it a billboard effect, where you have, messages change as you're reading the sign. A menu board is a specific exemption to perhaps a rule that prohibits scrolling message boards or flashing message signs or things that have the rolling neon message. A lot of towns will allow message board to be LED, and they allow a lot of menu boards to be interchangeable, but general display signs usually have a fixed message or a fixed message that only changes once every 24 hours. Today's special is different than tomorrow's special, but it's not a rolling, continuous, distracting the driver feature.
I didn't do this as the standard, but there are models where you can also, this gets into the nitty gritty, but you can also regulate to the degree that if you're going to allow a menu board to change, there you can regulate basically metric per second. So you can only change screen however many screens. There are different metrics depending on different bylaws. I didn't choose to include that. That is an option. So that it's yeah, and it's more of a setting that it would just automatically change screens if this is what you were to be allowing. Basically, that would be an automatic setting that it would change the screen however many seconds. And you would basically you could set a standard that says like you can do that provided that it changes at 8 seconds per screen. I forget the exact terminology they use, but it's like a defined terminology that I've seen show up at least in 1 or 2 different bylaws.
So you could have a menu screen in one corner.
So I'm going to just speak in big picture here because my time on speaking is somewhat limited, obviously. One, the biggest thing that you need to change in the blue when it comes to 407 is the materials that you're using. Your materials need to incorporate modern materials. And the second thing, when you're talking about scrolling messages and so on and so forth, is you're in direct conflict with the Brandon Guidebook, which is what the sign ordinance currently is based on. The recommendations and guidelines out of the Brandon Guidebook, the chapter on signage. And the guidebook may be outdated, but it's the guidebook wants to maintain the traditional architecturally compatible type of signage as opposed to current mobile sign next to the town office or the feather flags that are in full bloom. So during weed season, but I those are in terms of the big picture, you have to look up at what's your basis for guidance. Right now, the basis for guidance in terms of signage is the Brandon workbook, and everything we're talking about tonight with neons and messages flashing and so on is not in the Brandon workbook.
I don't think we're necessarily saying allowing any of that as I think we're more just trying to understand the larger spectrum of signage, what isn't currently regulated in section that the sign section, and how can those regulations be crafted in a manner that aligns with that. But you're right that
I think to Jeff's point, the type of materials that are used for some, that's the current building is program.
yeah.
We should find out what the standard is. And we have to find out.
Well, I can tell you what the standard is. Logan can tell you. You know what the standard
Yeah.
is. So
Well, and go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, essentially, MDF is a material that's recycled plastic, and they can stamp it and shape it and color it to look like any material that you could imagine. You can go up to a synthetic signboard today, and it looks and feels like wood until you touch it. It's got the grain, got the color, got the variable color. It's kind of like siding. You can get siding that has better and better patterns ingrained into the plastic. So the current signboard material is very affordable. I would recommend that you try to manage your sign sizes to be compatible with standard signboard stock. And I have asked sign companies like Graphics, Awesome Graphics in Rutland and Keith's Sign Shop and then Winning Image in Pittsburgh to come up with some guidance on this. And so far they've said, oh yeah, we'd love to do that. Nobody's bothered to. But there are standards in terms of signage that make the most sense for both the people that makes the signs and the most sense for the consumer of the signs in terms of affordability. So there's that. I've got a request from the convenience store up the street in Brandon to replace their existing traditional illuminated plastic gas station freestanding sign. And what they're doing is trying to keep the same frame and infrastructure. They're just changing the message board because they're shifting their gas brand over. Well, in theory, one thought would be we can't regulate the message. Right? I mean, that's protected under free speech. And if they're using the same framing and if they're not changing the size, they're not changing ownership, they're just updating the message, then does it need a permit? Or does it conflict with the common section 407? Or does it fall into where the zoning administrator has limited leeway to make a decision in 407? Because it generally follows the guide rules for repair and maintenance, but it's a non-conforming material. So, I mean, not my problem, but it's a good question in terms of clarifying in the signage. What do you do with working older signs that are not really changing much, and the owners don't want to change much? I mean, those freestanding signs are very expensive, and to put a new one up is amazing money. Just huge numbers. So if they can repurpose the existing frame and standards and so on, that they've had all this time, pre-existing, for example, and some lenience in that should be clarified.
But there is another sign of board. Simple business district.
Again, I can't pick up his mic, so I'm sorry.
So there's the central business ordinance for sidewalk merchandise. That's a standalone from the blue one. And I think we should probably incorporate that into whatever signage section we come up with. One possible thing that we might want to do is get the combined draft with the signage put together and then run that by the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah,
So
get rid of
we
the
have-
old, get rid of the old
Yeah.
freestanding conflicting stuff that the select board did.
And
So I
that,
mean, there's things there that are not in the below that probably should be. Like you can put your stand of the ones outside, but you would leave a 6-foot wide
Mhm.
sidewalk. Now that should be covered somewheres, and that, some of that is signage.
yeah, and the 6 foot, the select board ordinance has a 6 foot side, maintaining access to 6 feet of sidewalk access, and that is reflected in that draft. And there's also a point that clarifies about farmers markets and outdoor merchants and things like that, and that also is reflected. It's actually already reflected in the blue. I did actually find it it's like a specific, can't remember exactly which section, but there is just a disclaimer that says like this in no way is intended to inhibit farmers market or something like that.
So what do you guys think about, doing different sections with different affected audience? Like signage for the chamber.
My understanding is the Luo currently allows for up to 4 signs, and it's one per sign type. And so that's also an element that you can only have. Is that correct, Jeff? Is that what you
Five
said?
signs, including an open flag, which
Okay, gotcha.
I practice have to say open. So, but
The below is one of each of 5 signs.
Okay.
Standing sign, either a wall mounted or a projection sign, not both. A window sign up to 30% of the glass. A sandwich board sign up to 10 square feet per side. And an open flag, not to exceed 15 square feet. So those are the 5 signs types that you can apply for at one time for the whopping fee, including recording, of $68. Best permit fee schedule I know of. Now, there's some businesses that don't need or want or use all those signs, but they have the option to do that.
I would say that, the business community would be interested in all the changes to the bill. What they'd be most interested in having input on the sign.
Well, just as a sidebar and an example, a real life example, Dunkin' Donuts has window signs. They didn't apply for them, and they put them up without asking to do so. And she said, well, corporate requires that we display these signs for at least 90 days. And then they rotate them. So that's something you may want to put into the mix, that signs of a certain nature need a permit and conform with size and location, but don't have to necessarily be static like a window sign, which is a window sign. You have the type that are there forever, and you have the type that is rolling advertising. The flavor of the month, the burgers, the burger
But
deal.
we don't have a lot of corporate franchises in town. But the owners of the franchises, get pressured by corporate to put out a standard offering. So that if you went into something here and you went into one in Kansas, you wouldn't feel like you were in 2 different types of stores.
Another type of
We-
sign you might want to address in your mix, since crash barriers are becoming very common everywhere now, depending, not just in gas stations, is bollard sign. Those sleeves that go over the crash barriers, the bollards. They have these advertising signs that go over the sleeve. The sleeve is a rotating sign depending on the product of the month. And so in other towns where we've had convenience stores come in, the development review board was specific, or the design, when it was conditional use, the board conditionally approved a specific type of sign, and feather flags if they weren't specifically approved. You can write if they start using feather flags, you write the management saying you're in violation, please remove the unpermitted sign. Same with bollard sleeves, which, you see at a lot of convenience stores, but you see them any place that it's there's a bollard, there's an opportunity to advertise. So you can decide whether you want bollard sleeves or not. But it's a type of sign that's very common and not in the blue.
I think we should try to wrap up the sign section, pull it out of the accessory dwelling unit section, as you proposed, section 9, I think it is, Article 9. Try to get that wrapped up, try to get a session where we can get in front of chamber members and talk about how we're changing, we're updating, modernizing the land ordinances, but we want their input on signage. And then I think we also need to try to nail down sooner rather than later, Articles 1, 2, and 3. I think Articles 1 and 2 are in great shape. We haven't really spent any time in 3, which is where we are potentially proposing to have 3 different types of residential. I think we've agreed that the flood hazard within all of the section and it's permanent.
Yeah.
And there's not really a need to have modifications made to it.
Yeah, I can speak to that, which is that the Rutland region, Rutland County, and actually all the state of Vermont is actually going through the process of looking at flood bylaws and river corridors to make sure they meet most up-to-date federal standards and also looking at the state's recommended standards. And the town of Brandon adopted the state's model flood bylaws. I'm actually not sure exactly when that happened, but I know that you have that language, which is the language that the state encourages and recommends. So there's, yeah, that's really why I'm not planning on looking at it. Is that's the exact language that the state recommends and encourages and offers those higher level protections in areas of high flood risk.
I'm not sure if it's probably going to be between 26, sorry, July 27th and 20 was the last time the bill was in the town manager's mountain and we have
Because if it's a lit sign in particular, it's going to be flashing and
If it's not visible from the street.
then it's visible from my house that's directly behind Dunkin' Donuts and it's flashing at night. So I think we have to
Yeah.
be careful and plan. And the other thing is if we don't have regulations around this, people will get very creative very quickly. So I think in order to look at the whole aesthetic of the town and the people who border on the businesses, we should be careful about it.
Yeah, but really, my thought is that if it's not visible from the street, it doesn't change.
so they
The nature of the nature and all the fireflies that are under the tree canopy right behind Duncan. So I think there's lots of other considerations as well.
and so the sign regulations as defined in the current blue order. The purpose of the section is to preserve and improve the existing attractive aspects of the Brandon environment, promote the public welfare, convenience and safety of its inhabitants and visitors. Conserve and enhance the value of properties, encourage a suitable style and scale of advertising, and then refers people to the work for more guidance and aesthetic. That's good.
That also included something about environmental thoughtfulness, not only for recycled materials, but the impact it has on the environment around it. So for example, if it's a lit sign, you know, that abuts two forests, how bright is it and what time does it go out? You know,
What pollution can be a problem, and, you know, the signage today says, you know, downward facing the lighting and signs. You know, if they're not entirely. But that could be, which would be sprinkled. Any other comments on the signage part? If people had a chance to read through articles 1 and 2.
So yeah, I had a question. So the attachment you sent on Wednesday, has any of that been changed since then? Or if I
The-
read that now?
So yeah, what I had sent Wednesday, I've not made any changes. I have that doc open and I'm just making comments on that to flag for any future when we get there. So I'm not intending.
So it's appropriate for me to just read that as it is
Yeah,
now.
yep.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with the modifications that you and Natalie and others have contributed to Articles 1 and 2. So,
Okay.
so I'm hoping that we can start putting these to bed so that we can keep moving forward, because half of the year is over already. I started working on a schedule of when we should do public outreach. We will have a booth in Central Park this coming Saturday that we're sharing with the Energy Committee and also Solar Fest. But I'd like to be able to have a blow up of the current zoning. And there's also that you had sent Erin another poster that she's going to make, which is really more in line with what we're trying to do than it is with the energy, where you take the 3 stickers.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's a very good thing for planning commission input from residents
Mm,
on where you think, our priorities are.
mm,
We went through a similar process last December, I think it was, with the meeting up in town hall for the town plan. So, the more we can get finalized, the earlier we get it out to folks so they can give us feedback on it. We don't want anybody to say at any point, I didn't have a chance to weigh in,
mm-hmm.
right? So
Absolutely.
that's very important in this process. We probably won't necessarily work on the Blue O again for another few years unless the state makes major changes. So the town plan, which is our overall concept of, where we want to move over the next 7 years, that has to get updated every 7 years. That's kind of the platform that we pull out parts to make into zoning ordinances, right? So we accomplished the one thing the select board signed off in February, turned our attention to this. What we need in order to, Logan is working with a grant that we received from the state to modernize the ordinances. That has to be completed, signed off, approved, in place by the end of this calendar year, right? So that seems like a really long ways away. But, the days are already starting to get shorter.
And that includes, there's a public hearing process as well. So that's not just, that deadline isn't for drafting, that's for the select board signing off on it. Yeah.
Well, I envision us having a couple of meetings, one that we have, a town hall meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll serve pizza or something like that if we can get the town to pay for it. And then the select board will do its own. And that's how the town plan process worked.
Gotcha.
So
Specifically, what is our homework?
Yeah.
What do we need to do? Our next meeting is not till August, correct? Really, we have a couple months between our vacations that we're taking. What do we need to do before then?
August is only 30 days away, right? So I think we need to make
That's
any
right.
final comments
July
on the signage. Yes.
Yeah. So 2, 2, 3, and 9 in the version that I sent, and I can send it again just so that everyone has it at the top of their inbox.
But those are important. We really have to nail those down on August 5th. Okay. So
Yeah.
it doesn't mean wait until August 5th to make comments.
And I also had a and also I provided a web map where you can see if there was a creating a denser residential district and splitting up the current residential district, what that might look like based off of the existing conditions of that kind of existing smaller lots, closer setbacks presently, closer to the downtown, and less density further away from the downtown to kind of encourage that walkable downtown as well. So I'll also just send that in the email chain. And I think what could be great as well, which I found effective, is as you're looking through those, you're welcome to add comments to the Word document, and you can send that to me. And then what I can do is put all of that together into a new draft that I can then bring and share my screen, and we can just kind of go through on the screen, and everyone will already have looked at it. Everyone's already put their comments in, and then everyone's comments will be on one document during one public meeting. And then we can kind of go through and iron out section by section. So I would say, yeah, articles, would you say 2 and 3, and then 9, which is now the sign article.
Right.
I think that would be a great place to be able to come back on August and kind of solidify, identify what everyone's issues might be or not be with each section, and kind of work through the kinks and all of that as well. And also the actual boundaries. And so, sorry, I was referring to articles, not items, articles 2, 3, and 9. And 9 is the potential new sign article. So presently, signs are a section, which a section's a subset of an article. So we're looking to make the signs section its own article, because that's typically the standard. If you look at any land use ordinance, it's its own article, if not its own ordinance. So that's why that's the case. Just
I
wanted
think
to add
the
that.
signage article is something that the zoning administrator can have as its own separate printout and hand out to people who are applying for permits for signs.
And the idea
So
generally,
they don't have to go through the whole blue to dig it out.
right. And the idea generally is like how the flood bylaws, the flood hazard and river corridors are their own article. There are situations where applicants solely care about signs. So the idea is that an applicant can go and just look at Article 9, and then there will also just be an article specific, or sorry, a sign specific definition section. So they can just go to the sign specific definitions. So all they're looking at is the information pertaining to them, and it's organized in a manner that's easier for them to navigate and find that information.
Yeah, one thing in particular that I like that you've been doing is identifying words that we need to define.
Yeah, you will. Yeah,
So,
you will see that across the document of just, and that is in big part, thank you to Jeff, by really highlighting just the need to, clarify and define more terms, so that in these, I would agree with Jeff saying of definitions make a good, bylaw. I don't think that's how he said it, but yeah. Yeah,
sure.
and Articles 2 are the use categories in the Blue O, and Article 3 are the zoning district specific requirements. And that's where you get into what's allowed in each zoning district as administrative permit, or what's allowed as conditional use, or what's prohibited. And it also speaks to the dimensional elements within the zoning district, which are things like setbacks, minimum lot coverage, and height.
So
I
simpler
can't
and
take credit for
clearer
the-
is the goal.
I can't take credit for the fact that definitions make good zoning. Garrett Baxter from VLCT wrote an article about that. I've tried to distribute copies to planning commissioners. Not sure I even have it anymore, but he did an article, and it's probably in their resource library at VLCT, about the importance of good definitions in a zoning ordinance. So,
Yeah.
But
And
any applicant that comes into the zoning administrator should be able to really get a nice, clear answer, unless it's a really complicated question that needs to go to the DRB.
right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Think so. Are you talking about the current Blue O language? I haven't came across that. My understanding it's the zoning administrator, unless it's
I couldn't,
There you go.
again, I'm having trouble with the microphones. I didn't hear what Bob said. So,
Well,
so,
the
so,
question was,
but what was the question? What was the statement?
The question is if the zoning administrator thinks that a sign or signage is worth approving, and then it has to go to the select board for final approval.
I don't think
which I
that's
believe
good.
happened.
I disagree with that. I think the select board and the Blue O should be, and by statute, they are two separate entities. The select board doesn't have any authority under 24 VSA 117 to meddle with the chapter. It doesn't have, once it
Yeah,
approves.
if I'm
the
not
zoning
suggesting that it
regulations.
happened, I'm suggesting that it was part, that I thought I saw it as part of the previous Blue.
I've got a copy of all
Draft,
the Blue O's that go back 4 or 5 versions, and I don't think that, ever since chapter 117 was passed, which is in the 1970s, I don't think the select board has any authority to meddle with it other than to approve it once the draft of the zoning regulations come to them for approval. After that, state statute pretty much guides the procedure.
I'm fine with it.
In,
I went back to the farmer's market sign that we approved and thought that there was nothing standing in the plan, and then looked at it, said, "Well, you can approve it."
I'm not getting it, sorry. Could you
Yeah,
repeat that?
I can fill you in, Jeff. Basically, and I think I understand what you're saying, Neil. It's basically that so Neil was one asking if the select board has any related permitting associated with the Blue O signage, and the answer is no, correct?
I believe that's state statute.
Yeah. But there is a separate sign ordinance in the central business district that is a select board ordinance. And I think does the select board have any authority relating to that specific ordinance?
I think, I don't know if that's, the intent of the sign ordinance. If you shouldn't have more than one ordinance for signage.
Right.
What
So
happened there was during emergency procedures that had to do with, there was an emergency type of situation with the tear up of Main Street that was negatively impacting business. So the select board made a decision to help business with their particular ordinance. But that ordinance was in conflict with the zoning regulations. Everybody kind of let it go and work together to get past the issue of the loss of business due to the reconstruction. It's history. Now you should have one ordinance. And if there's select board exceptions, then they should be included in the ordinance, and they are. In the Blue O, there's a provision for the select board to approve temporary banners and so on and so forth. So don't muddy the water with 2 or 3 different rules, and it doesn't work well in my experience. Sorry.
Well, I think that signs like the farmer's market that are on town-owned property, I think the select board has input on them.
And I think the Blue O addresses that. Whether it addresses it, and whether it addresses it adequately at this particular drafting or writing is a different issue.
I'm just going to read a quote from the current Blue O. This is section 624, outdoor display of retail products, subsection B. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent farmers markets, church bazaars, and other similar events from displaying merchandise outdoors in designated non-sidewalk areas. So that's the
Merchandise,
current length.
what is
So that's on
merchandise
their
signage?
properties.
That is not specific signage. That's just a general standard about
Well, it also says in the
merchandise.
Blue one. That's the,
that's the Blue O.
also says you have to have permission from the owner of the property if it's not your. Well, if that's the town, then they'd have to go deal with the town manager or the select board and approve.
So in this specific example, the solution is relatively simple. If they're having a special event, they're allowed, or even if it's not a special event, and they're allowed to put out outdoor merchandise under certain conditions, then you can add a provision for short-term advertising that follows the outdoor merchandise. But there's got to be timeframes and limits. But having more than one rule that addresses signage is going to be problematic.
There will be one rule. So we'll wrap up signage as of August 5th, the next meeting.
Mhm.
We'll finish Articles 2, 3, 9 is the sign. Right.
And I'll just add that, and I'll send this in the email, but there'll be, so article, the last article of the Blue O is definitions. And so currently in that article, there's a specific section just for wireless telecommunication facility definitions. And there'll be the exact same thing. There'll be a specific section just for definitions applicable to the sign article. So it'll be the same sort of thing. So in that email, I'll also mention to check out those definitions as well. Just so everyone will get an email, just say, these are the sections.
And floodplain,
specific.
floodplain articles follow the same. Typically, floodplain articles, they
Right,
have definitions in the article.
absolutely.
So, well, water source protection zone. I mean, any special
Mm.
overlay district usually has its own definition.
Right.
Okay. So,
Yeah, so for the Article 9 in the current Blue O, if you went on the website, that is wireless telecommunication. So it does involve a little bit of renumbering, which I've already actually done for wireless telecommunication. So that's the benefit of putting the signs in Article 9 as opposed to Article 5 or something, is that I'm only renumbering however many articles that's below it. So putting it lower, there's not as much renumbering, which will make it easier just from like getting this document finalized standpoint, so that all the sections reference one another.
Good.
So
would the town manager like to be on that email? Okay. And Logan has created some incredible maps that I haven't figured out how to use yet, but
I can, if you'd like, I can share my screen and show it just so that everyone understands how to navigate it,
that'd be great.
as well as members of the public. And yeah, I'm already in. I think the one thing you might have to do is just allow me to share my screen. I don't know how big of a, I think it might
You,
be,
you have the
yeah.
mouse. The top one there. Nope. Right there. Let's give it a try.
So if you were to open up this link, the first thing you would see is this. And actually, I'm gonna stop. And the only reason I want to stop sharing my screen is that actually the view you wouldn't see is quite the same. And the only reason is that I'm the person who created the map, so I have a little bit of a different view. So I need to go onto what's called a private browser just so that it pops up like anyone would view it. Sorry about that. Share screen. That's the right one. Okay. So great. Perfect. Yeah. So what we're looking at when you open up the screen, what we're looking at is, I don't know, what's proposed based off of our discussion. So the last discussion we had was talking about how the neighborhood residential district. So first, actually, let's go really big picture, just like how do we use this map, which is that this is what you would first see. And on the left side here, you'll be able to scroll down and kind of see the legend. So on this side here is where you can kind of do some things relating to the map where you can kind of edit. I'd say for simplicity's sake, this first and the basically below the add button, which is called layers. When you go there, then what you can do is you can uncheck and check things. So what we're currently looking at is the potential changes that could be made to the Brandon land use ordinance map, the zoning map, based off of what we discussed. How we could compare this. So for one thing, the red is formerly blue. So that all the red is what is currently the neighborhood residential district. How we can see that is by going here, you'll see for each one of these, there's an eye that pops up. And so you can uncheck and check the eyes. So what you'll want to do is uncheck anything that says proposed in the front of it. And you'll want to check, you'll want to turn the eye on for anything that has current in front of it to be able to see the current. So we go on the current zoning map. We can see here's the current zoning map. And we can see then we'll start getting more complicated and we could add, you know, that's your river corridor right there. And so essentially you can go and turn these layers on and off is more what I wanted to kind of just speak to and how you would be able to do that. The main changes, and one other thing that's worth noting, and I think this will be particularly well from the public standpoint so that people can say, hey, how does this impact me? How does this impact my home, right? Is essentially you can actually go down to a specific lot. And so for instance, this is the Hannaford, right? I believe.
To the left there, yeah.
Yeah, and we could go and click on that parcel, and I've removed any, you know, personal information, but you can go and see if someone has, you know, their E911 address. This is the official address associated with the lot. You can see that there. You can see the official acreage of the lot based off of the 2023 tax data that the state has available. You can see a description of the lot based off of how your tax assessor characterizes the lot. You can see the grand list year. Newsflash, they're all going to say 2023. So I could actually remove that. But and then if someone wants, you know, some people might have multiple lots. So you can actually see this my specific lot. I didn't want to provide any identifying information, but a landowner would have their unique tax identification number, but no one knows one another's tax identification numbers. So it's a way for someone to go and see their specific lots. So you can see this for any lot. You can start to see, hey, you know, this lot right here is, you know, 0.17 acres, and you can kind of visualize exactly where the districts start and end. Just kind of generally, and I think this is the biggest question. So everything that's red again is presently blue. And so this is basically cutting out a piece of that. And really, I think there's a big question here on whether, I guess this would be the south end of Park Street. You can see the north end of Park Street is in this lower density blue. Should the south end of Park Street be in the lower density blue as well? I think there's also a question of High Street. So I'll be on, like, this is why I wanted to give you, you know, a draft so you guys could think about this and these sorts of boundaries, because this is something on the same exact link I can then go and update the boundaries to reflect. So this link can kind of be, we can update as needed based off of everyone's feedback, but this is just a starting point. I just want to stress that for everybody. You'll also, and so there's also a little bit of West Seminary here. I'll note that so that's the dog park. Can you see? Oh, you can see my cursor. That's great. I'm trying to see. I was just curious if so the high school is in the central business district, like Jack had mentioned. So I'm just trying to, so everything that isn't blue or red has not changed, with one other exception. And then there's also this area over here, which kind of goes back to the walkability. This area is a little bit more denser as well, just this little beginning. And this, I think, is also a question, but maybe this little area here, there's a few structures where maybe if someone wanted to go and take an existing structure and add a few bedrooms, you know, put up a wall, create another dwelling unit, that sort of thing. Maybe they want to do that and maybe it makes sense. And so how I also arrived here, and this speaks to Natalie's purpose of this district, was creating a walkable, more dense community, was I looked on Google Maps, and Google Maps is not perfect, but based off of Google Maps, any part of the red is within 15-minute walking distance of any part of the yellow, any part of the central business district. So the idea is 15 minutes is to a degree an arbitrary standard, but it is something that kind of is a planning standard that is often used, that if you're within a 15-minute walking distance, that's considered walkable. And that's, you know, it's not a perfect standard and people walk at different paces, but it's the standard nonetheless.
So my house on High Street is exactly a half a mile to Morningside Cafe.
Gotcha.
So I do it every day. Gotta walk the dog and get my pastry.
So yeah, so there's, you know, that sort of question. And then one other thing I want to call out is presently the town has an aquifer district, which is a base district. Natalie suggested, which is most common, is having this be an overlay district. So in purple on outline, and you can't really see it on the map, but it's this little this purple outline here, and I can make the outline a thicker color so it really stands out. But really all of these, the purple outline here, this is the present aquifer district. All we're doing is turning that into an overlay district and then changing the base district. And so how I arrived here was basically taking, extending what currently is the neighborhood residential district. So all of this is presently blue. If we went on the current zoning map, you'd see that. And actually, just to orient everybody really quick, now we're back on the current zoning map. I have to turn off, always make sure you turn off the proposed zoning map or you'll get confused. But you'll see here, this used to be a whole aquifer district, right? It's all in purple. So what we did, or what I'm proposing is essentially, it takes a minute to just get used to. It's basically extending that blue strip further, continuing on 73 Forestdale Road into, the junction of North Street and this sort of denser area here. And then as well as neighborhood residential. And now you might be wondering why this specific area, and maybe, for example, Middle Road or Newton Road or some of these other areas. And then there's also up here is a little bit more, is also blue. It's also neighborhood, it's also a neighborhood. But the reason why there's this little gap here, I just want to call that out, is the current river corridor overlay. You would see here, I got to turn off all the maps. This is all the, there's signs. You'll see there's a river corridor here, and there's also flood and fluvial hazards. So there are these areas of high flood risk. So do we want to, zone this for a neighborhood when there's high flood risks, especially when the town has, the town plan speaks to flood resiliency, and it's, the town currently has river corridor regulations and flood hazard regulations. So that was why I ended up ending up on that sort of boundary. There's one other thing I want to highlight for everybody. Apologies. Is this orange line, and you'll see this here. So the town of Brandon has an incredibly impressive amount of historic architectural structures. And so in the 1980s, the Vermont it's historic preservation. What is that department? I'm blanking. I forget. The division of historic preservation did an incredible architectural detailing of basically every single historic structure. And so this presently is a draft that we've really only been discussing, and is really for public meetings to discuss and finalize. So it's presently only available for the Planning Commission. It's up to, I would leave it at that.
This is a work in progress.
Yeah, you are more than welcome to, it's up to, I will leave it to the Planning Commission on what to do with this link. But essentially the purpose of, the town has 3 state designated historic districts. And then this 1980s historic preservation huge book basically detailed in the town of Brandon every single one of the historic structures that existed at the time based off the state register's listing of historic structures and where that exactly is in the town of Brandon, as well as these state designated districts. So ultimately the orange boundaries are the town of Brandon's 3 state designated historic districts, as well as in a few cases abutting historic structures. And all of that is based off of this 1980s detailing. And actually you can see the state, these buildings that we're looking at here, I was able to pretty much easily compare and say, comparing from the 1988 map to, this map we're looking at right here, you can often see the outline of the structures look exactly the same, that it's very clearly the exact same structure in 1988. Yeah,
Okay,
go
I have a
ahead.
question.
Yep.
To talk to me like I'm a golden retriever or a small child.
Yeah, totally.
What exactly would you like us to do when we look at this map?
Yeah,
What's
so
our-
I would say the big thing I would say with this map is what I had mentioned earlier, which is the red. So the red really is higher density neighborhoods. So are these the areas in Brandon that we should be encouraging higher density, and maybe and be granular, be like kind of meticulous, be like You know, like maybe it's literally a specific part of a street, or maybe it's just a little lot. Like that's totally okay, because the nature of drawing boundaries is you have to draw the boundaries somewhere. And so that's also part of is, do the boundaries make sense? But it might be bigger things of like a whole area shouldn't be denser. So I would say this red area, you know, in particular, and then also up here, whether these areas should be blue or if there's anything, you know, that maybe there should be more blue or less blue. And I considered this, but then I leaned against it. But was also, should Forestdale have a red area that might be higher density? I didn't really think so because of the purpose I kind of described of a 15-minute walking distance to downtown. Forestdale is not 15-minute walking distance to downtown. But maybe you want a you want to allow a higher density in a really tiny area of Forestdale. So those changes, I would say more generally, the historic architecture, really, the standard there is to, and you'll see this, there's basically a specific mechanism that's trying to encourage housing that fits the historic architecture of Brandon as described in this 1980s really detailed. So for each one of these structures, they detail the historic architectural elements, the architectural style, the types, you know, patios or very little things, including like woodworking. So Brandon actually has these, I forget what they're called. They're very unique, but this wood carving that is suns, that pertains to, I've noticed them as I've been walking and actually in one case driving around Brandon, but there are these, it's very interesting woodwork where it's very, I've never really seen anything like it, but it's these wood carved suns essentially. There's a whole section on this booklet that they register. It's apparently very unique to Brandon. But this sort of speaks to like, how can you encourage those? And so it's encouraging that architectural style that fits the town of Brandon. And if you do that, you can, there's some kind of density bonuses. And if you also actually build affordable housing or things like senior housing or other requirements that kind of meet the town's other goals, say also like the state has what's called the renewable or the residential stretch code, which is essentially an optional energy code that you can kind of, it's called a stretch because you're kind of like reaching to a higher standard, is how it's been explained to me. But that's, so it's an optional code. But if you adopt that code, you have a really energy efficient building. Like we want to encourage that. So basically using this as a mechanism, as well as this area basically being protected. Natalie wrote up some language that speaks to a standard about protecting, kind of, I think the term she used was like significantly fragmenting or destroying a historic area. Basically, it also categorizes this whole overlay, the whole streetscape, as an area that you can't destroy or fragment, because it's a historic area that contains, based off of the register's estimate, it's over 200 structures.
If you haven't seen it, I mean, the workbook, which is kind of dated, but has all the historically, architecturally significant residences in town highlighted, along with, you know, guidance on the kind of architectural styles that you should.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
But
So I think we have some homework to do for the next session.
so you
Uh,
want us to focus, that's what I heard you say.
Yeah, so
Okay.
on the map, yeah, I would
Okay.
say if that, does that area feel like the area that you want to encourage higher density? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it, yeah.
So I think the key to the splitting into two different residential districts is what are the differences?
Mhm.
You know, on Park Street, you might still want to have a certain minimum size lot.
Mhm.
On Franklin Street, you might have a different lower number, right? So,
Yeah.
but then again, like you said, the south side of Park Street is a little different than the north side.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
should that be two districts, or these are kind of the things that we really should try to nail down. So the homework assignment is to read sections 2 and 3 and 9.
And then also look at the map, because the map relates to, so like one of the sections in Article 3 is this new denser district. What would the standards be? What is the difference from the old district? But you might be okay with those standards if the new standards relate to an area that you want it to relate to. But if, the new standards are allowing a higher density and it's of an area that you don't want to allow a higher density, that's a problem.
But if we change a district, doesn't mean that it affects any current building, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Everything's grandfathered in,
yep.
so. Okay. All right, that was great.
Yeah.
Not much
absolutely.
left on the agenda. On July 6th, we will have a booth. I hope to have a blow up of the current zoning
I should get that to you tomorrow.
and just, so we can encourage any feedback on zoning issues, if people have suggestions or complaints, if, the fee structure is too high, again, like Jeff said, we don't create it, but we can make recommendations to the select board.
Mm.
So,
Compared to a lot of municipalities. It's just the details and the clarity of the
Yes.
fee schedule.
Oh, what I said was, I asked whether on the 6th at the booth, if there would be a way for people to record their comments.
and I said, yes. We're going to have posted notes that people can attach to the poster boards that we'll have.
Oh, great.
All right, the next regular meeting is the first Monday in August, August 5th. So keep that in mind. Try not to do your homework the night before. Well, right, to have a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, public. Thank you, non-public, Jeff.
Good night, folks.
Have a good night, Jeff.
Good night, Logan. We'll be in touch. Again,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.